Welcome back to What the Fertility Season 4. Today we are chatting with Courtney, who has the unique experience of pursuing IVF for PGTM exclusion genetic testing due to some family history between her and her husband. Welcome, Courtney. We are very excited to hear your unique. I think we might have talked about this once in the last 4 years, but it wasn't solely like IVF or it kind of came up in their story due to like their ancestry. But yeah, super excited to talk with you this morning and hear all about your story.
I think most people go into the testing like they do that blood work going in and they find out something popped up or they have another child with a genetic condition. We kind of went into it knowing ahead of time. Rick had a family history. Unfortunately, it's with some estranged family, so that made our journey a little bit more awkward, I guess.
I'm
I guess
sure.
I'll just go into our history. We met when we were 33 years old and had kind of a quick relationship. And then when things got serious, he said, "My mom wants me to bring up something to you, and it's really important." And I was like, "Oh my God, what could this be?" And he says, "My father has Huntington's. I have no relationship with my father, but he has Huntington's disease, and it has a 50-50 percent chance of being passed on. So that means we can't have kids." And I'm just like, "Oh my God." We were like about to move in together. It was just always something in the back of my mind, like, of course we would have kids. And then I
Wow.
kind of was like, I'm lucky to have found somebody. Maybe this isn't the path for us, or maybe there's other options. We'll worry about that later.
You kind of go
Um,
through all the scenarios because you're already in love with this person.
I
And so it's like,
know.
this might have been a deal
Exactly.
breaker, but how do we make it work now?
I know. So I think it took me a while to like bring it up to my mother, but she actually found out there was a way to test embryos and do IVF without knowing whether or not you have the disease itself. I guess I don't know a ton about Huntington's and I don't really want to speak to like exactly what it is, but the more I research, the more frantic I get over it. It hits later in life, so we don't know whether Rick has it or not. He's never gotten himself tested.
Wow.
Um, it came about in his family because um, his father's had three other children with a second wife, and one of the children was ill, and they tested and tested, couldn't figure out what was going on with her, and it turns out she had juvenile Huntington's, which is really rare and really bad. So when she had it, they said it had to have come from somebody in your family. So it ended up being from my husband's father. And he had the rest of his children tested and they all have it. So it's kind of devastating for their entire family.
Oh, wow.
So that's just something that they'll have to deal with. Like they're going to be ill and pass on this if they decide to have children. But my mom did some research, found an article, I think, if I look at my notes, it was like in the Post. And it was about a basketball reporter and his wife, and his mother had Huntington's. And he saw how terrible of a disease it was with his mother. And he had no desire to know when he was young whether he had it or not, knowing there's no cure, there's really no treatment. It's like the worst of ALS and Parkinson's together. It's just awful. So he decided when he wanted to have children, is there a way you can do it without knowing your status? And there was, and it was called non-disclosure testing. And that was where you do IVF and then your results would be known by your clinic or by the genetic company, but they would never really tell you what your own status was. They kind of keep it from you, like how many embryos made it and stuff. And you
So
do
like, so
everything
like if
kind
you,
of blind.
that's really nice. So like, for example, if you had four embryos and they all had it, they would just say you didn't have any embryos.
Right. So for
Wow.
me,
Okay.
like when I discuss this with like some of the clinics that I went to, one was pretty adamant on like Rick needs to be tested and he needs to know. And we were like, "Oh, I just don't know." And Rick was like, "I guess I can know if like it's really important to you." And when we saw the other one, they were like, "We totally understand why you wouldn't want to know this now.
Yeah.
Like, there's ways to do it. Let us talk to somebody. Like, we can figure this out together." So that was nice.
That's
So
great.
that's the avenue we pursued. It was another like thing in your head. You should probably check with multiple clinics. It's nice to like not take one answer and be like, "Done, my journey's over now. If we don't want to know Rick's status, then like it's
And that's
over for
like
us."
an emotional, lifelong, like I know like when you want to have kids, you're again willing to do pretty much anything. But I love that that's just a testament, like you said, to just kind of get a second, third, fourth opinion of somebody that's gonna like be in line with what your family wants.
even just like bringing this up to my OB, like she was like, well, there's a 50% chance like your child wouldn't have it. So why wouldn't you just try? And I'm like, you don't understand what it is, I guess, or like you just don't want to take that chance when it's as devastating as it can be. It's really bad. So
And then knowing that too, like you have this child and it's like such a like prolonged disease that you're like, oh, you're just kind of waiting for it to happen.
right. So we had to see two clinics to find somebody to work with us. And this kind of all happened right around COVID. So then things got pushed out even more. So I'm getting older and older. And I finally go back in like 2021, get retested for everything again. And then I found out my tubes were totally blocked the whole time. So
So
Oh
your
my
story
God.
was flipped.
did
Yeah.
not turn out well for me. And I'm like, wow. So I think
Oh.
I feel very guilty. I go into this not having had tried before. So I didn't even know. So I think IVF was rather easy for me only because I went into it knowing this was like my first line of defense against everything. But the doctor I worked with CNY Fertility
Yeah.
Yep.
kind of told me the odds were not in my favor just because of my age. So by the time I did some egg retrievals, I was 38. So like, the rates of attrition for IVF, they go down so quickly. And it's like, if you want two children, you want 6 euploid embryos. And like thinking of like, we were going to do the 3 rounds covered by insurance. The genetic testing costs a ton of money.
Yeah.
So that was the thing we had to pay for out of pocket. Unfortunately, we couldn't even try to get any of that covered just because we don't really know Rick's status. So like, it's not a definitive thing. I think one of the hardest parts of even starting this journey was working with the geneticist, trying to make the test. They wanted all this paperwork from Rick's family about the disease that we didn't have. And like, he's estranged from this family. So I'm like calling these people that I don't know, like begging them to send paperwork from 2008 that they don't even know where it is. So like just getting your foot in the door with them. Then they said it was a specific genetic probe they had to make. So that was with like our DNA. And then they were hoping for Rick's father's DNA, but they actually said they don't do non-disclosure testing, they do exclusion testing. So what that would mean is they'd look at the line of DNA that Huntington's is on, and then they would pull out from the embryo whether he inherited that from his paternal grandmother or grandfather. So we used Rick's mother's DNA. So like anything that had her DNA in it, we could use those embryos. So that was an interesting way to do it without really knowing either way.
Yeah. I feel like every step along the way, from insurance to I've been through the family history with a genetic counselor, like all of that, there's so many like little human errors to slip up to and be like, oh, you do, oh, he does have it, or the embryo does have it. So that has to be just such a delicate situation.
It was, yeah. So
Does the probe take like a long time to make too? Like
it took 8 weeks and it felt like forever.
I'm sure.
And then it got finished in like the beginning of December. And I'm like, great, let's start immediately. I'm so old. And then they were like, oh, we take, the month of December off egg retrievals for this clinic. So like you can start in January. Then January, I got sick. I thought I had COVID. We were like pushing things around. And it was just, every month feels like an eternity sometimes when you're like ready to go. We finally had all the information. The probe was made. They said they wouldn't start egg retrievals until the probe had been fully made, just to make sure that there were no issues with it. So I think I started in January 22. I did an egg retrieval and I had a fair amount of follicles for my age. We were predicting, I think, 17 and I got 22.
Wow.
So like, but when you think about that, you're like, 80% of these are mature. 80% of those can be fertilized. 50% make it to blast. Then 50% of those are bad because of HD, this Huntington's disease. And then really what's left, 35% is probably genetically normal because of my age.
Right.
So like, you're looking at 1 per round.
Right.
And we were only going to give it 3. So I did that round. We sent the embryos off for testing, which again takes several weeks to come back. And in the meantime, I was like, is there anything preventing me from like doing my second round in February? And they were like, no, if you feel good, you don't feel like you need a break, then go for it. So I started up my meds again, We're going to go right in February for another egg retrieval. Meanwhile, I got my results and I got, I think we sent 6 for testing and I got 2 euploid. They call them not at risk because they don't have any risk. So, and they were both males.
Oh,
So we go into the second round feeling pretty good. Got 2. That's great. Yeah. And then I think we were predicting maybe 16 follicles again, and they only had like 12.
Yeah, because now you're
so when I wake up and I'm
competing
like, now I thought I was going to get in the 20s. I thought I was going to have another, bunch to send, and then I get like 3 to send, and then I'm like, well, the odds are not in my favor here. So like that whole month, I was like, I feel like I wasted a round now. Like I couldn't wait for the results to come in, and they were like, don't get ahead of yourself. Like just see what happens. You never know. It's just really odds. Like you can't tell. And the odds were, it didn't, none of them were good. So that was like a big hit and like very upsetting. So I talked to some of the nurses there about priming I didn't know about before I started my journey. And like, it was something, I joined some Facebook groups and found out about omnitrope.
Yeah.
So I went on a little like mini omnitrope couple of months, took a little break for myself and did a mini dose of that and started again at the end of April. And then I got 29 in that next round. So I was like, I don't know. I hear that it works really well for some people and not for others, but
yeah, it didn't work for me.
So like, I don't know if it was like taking the break. Was it that? Was it just like random that I did so much better that round? So I felt pretty good about that. And then I thought, what other testing can I do? What if I only have 2 total? Like if I were going to transfer those 2, would I want to get all the tests I could get done? And just like my uterus, I don't know. I've never tried to get pregnant. I don't know what the state of anything is. There's some reason my tubes were blocked and I don't know what that is. Mm-hmm. So I did an ERA and then I did a receptiva.
Yeah.
Just to make sure there wasn't like silent endo or something going on. And those came back both negative. So that was good. Or like the ERA was like normal timing.
Right.
And in the meantime, I just had to like wait for my results to start my transfer. And that was an interesting time. It just felt like it took twice as long as normal. And then I missed the phone call when they called and they said, call us, we have good news. So I felt good calling back and they said, we have strange news. And I said, what? And they said, you got 5.
Wow.
Euploid, like non at risk embryos, and they're all males.
Oh my gosh.
Oh. Like, this is not like what I pictured for myself, but like,
yeah,
so happy to have anything. So
yeah. So you have 7 total embryos, all males.
All males.
That's a phenomenal outcome.
Yeah. I know. And it was like, even like when you looked at it, I think I sent 13 for testing that round and 11 out of those were males.
That's
like,
crazy.
Wild. Yeah.
I know. I've been pregnant like 10 times and only one that we tested was a male. The rest were all girls. And I just think that's so weird how that happened.
I know.
And Amanda had all boys too.
That's crazy. So I did all my testing and then I went to transfer whatever the best one was because there was really no choice. And I felt kind of comforted by that. I think like it feels weird choosing
the gender, right?
Yeah. So it was like out of my hands. Like you just pick whatever the best looking one is. And
so how is I just have a question. So now that you guys are not like, you're on the other side of like, okay, we were able to create embryos that are viable to transfer. How did your husband feel about the results? Because I'm sure in the back of his head, he's thinking, if we get really good results, maybe I don't have it. Or if we, did he have it?
I think he's always thought in his head he doesn't have it.
Right.
He's so optimistic and I'm the opposite. So I feel like if I knew that he did, that it would ruin like my life, just worrying about when it was going to hit. And just even now, like we don't know for sure. And like we both just turned like 40 in the last couple of years. And like it could hit, between now and like his 60s. So like I'm looking at him all the time for little clues of like something's going on. And he's just not bothered at all.
That's how
he's the opposite of me.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's such a great way to live that way versus like being so like worried constantly and like, yeah, I feel like, I mean, it's
I
fine.
just couldn't handle knowing any of that stuff. It's like,
I know. I'm the same way. Okay, so you're gearing up for transfer.
so I geared up for transfer and they picked the best looking embryo they could and we transferred and it worked and it's
Wow,
crazy. Yeah.
that's awesome.
I had diabetes and no other real complications. The pregnancy was really good. And then birth was a little traumatic for me. Just we had a failed epidural. I tried to give birth naturally, it didn't work out, and then a C-section after a couple of days. So we went back when my son turned 1 just to like get some consults and see what was going on with the rest of the embryos. Because then I had turned 40 and I was like, let's not wait forever. The OB was kind of, you should wait 18 months between. And I'm like, well, what if it doesn't work right away? So I think I
Right.
tried maybe when he was 15 months and it just didn't go as smoothly. I feel like I was very sure of myself the first time, like was getting lines right away after transfer. This time it was like very faint, kind of fading, not sure what's going on, but it ended up taking again. So
Wow.
our second transfer was also successful. So I have some other embryos. I don't know that we're going to have more than 2 children, but to
Yeah,
thinking about what to do with those things now, it's like I'd love to donate. I don't know how my husband feels about it, but
Yeah.
that's awesome. Well, congratulations.
I
thank
know,
you.
exciting.
I feel guilty, like everybody's got such sad stories, but I'm like, this is positive. I mean, it was felt like a very long journey. I mean, I feel like we talked
Well,
about having kids in 2018, and then to get to the point where we were even trying was like several years, and then
yeah, absolutely. And to be
everything.
faced with that as a couple, like IVF's a big deal. And I think too, like when you haven't been through like your own conception journey, maybe some IUIs, maybe some medicated cycles, and you are just stepping foot into that IVF clinic and in your shoes, you're really, I mean, you're doing it for your children, of course, but like you're doing it because of something that had happened in your partner's side. That takes a lot of courage. And I think I hear you reiterated a lot is like your age too. Like you're like, we got to go. There's no time to think about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
I know. Like when I was trying to get started, it was COVID, and my husband's business was a gym, so it was unable to be open like pretty much
Yep.
for a year
That
plus.
was same with
So he
mine.
kept being like, it's not a great time. It's not a good time financially. And I'm like, but it's,
There is no other time.
Anytime we have to, yeah.
yeah. So I think he never felt that pressure of age, whereas I was constantly hearing it from everybody. So
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. Do you have any advice? I think for someone that's maybe in your shoes, I think we did have a guest on that had a similar story, where like she wasn't as like, I guess, confident as you were going into it. And she was kind of like, I don't know what to do. Do you have any advice for someone that's like, we're gonna have to do IVF because of family history for our
I
children?
would say like shop around at clinics. Don't just listen to the first one. Find one that is willing to work with you. And number two, I would look into grants. There was actually a website for this particular disease where they're trying to eradicate it. And the only way to do that now is through like testing and not passing it on through generations. So they're willing to work with people to give them grants to do PGT.
That's
Or
great
it was
information.
like PGD at the time, but like you could also get things covered through insurance too. If you, it seems like it's a lot of work and stuff. And that was another thing. Like, number one, we don't have a definitive diagnosis for Rick. And number two, I didn't have the time to wait around. So I was like, I'm going to pay for this testing to get it done. It felt like forever as it was. But if you have the time, like try for grants. Even the fertility clinic I have does, I think, grants. I don't know if they're monthly or like every once in a while, but like that will pay for some of the rounds. I guess I'm very spoiled too, where like money wasn't, I mean, it was very, very expensive when we found a way to deal with it, but I didn't have to pay for the IVF part. But if you
Right.
can find ways,
Uh-huh.
do some research. There's a lot of stuff out there, especially for like every other disease there is as well. Like I'm sure there's grants to find.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I'm just curious. So like once you got that diagnosis of like your tubes were blocked, did that help your insurance cover some on your end or no? That was kind of like,
No, it was just like a thing. I think in New York State that year that they had to cover the 3 rounds.
Oh, wow.
I don't know why it was like so shocking and devastating for me. I knew I wasn't going to need my tubes, but like when I heard it, like I just, number one, the test was very painful. And then he like comes in and he like makes no big deal about it. He's like, well, your tubes are blocked. And I just like start crying. And he's like, what is wrong? You don't need your tubes for IVF. Like, it's not a big deal. But I'm like, to know this whole time, like I couldn't have had kids if like I would have gone through a lot of years of trying probably without knowing this stuff. So
and honestly, I think in my shoes, I think once I'd process it, maybe I'd be like, actually, this is great. I was gonna have to do this anyways. And so
so I did process it. Even like my OB this time, we've scheduled a C-section and she was like, you should think about having your tubes removed. And I'm just like, excuse me? And then the more I think about it, I'm like, well, you're right. Now that's like permanent birth control.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to worry about anything. And like,
exactly, especially the fact that you are seemingly pretty fertile and, you know, it could, and you guys you've done all of this for almost 5 years, I've heard you say, to prevent natural conception. And so that, you know, I'm kind of in the same boat of like, I've had reoccurrent pregnancy loss. I don't want any more children. Like, I don't want to deal with this. And it's like, do you just get your tube tied, or in your situation, do you get them removed and then you don't have to worry about it?
Right. So she recommended doing it. And I was like, you know what? Like if something happens or I change my mind, it's still an option to have a kid if I wanted to with my frozen embryos. So
yeah. I was going to say, Amanda, you should connect with Amanda once you obviously your second baby needs to come here and you need to make that decision, but just with donor embryos and adoption and how all that works.
Mm-hmm. I have like one other friend who has done IVF and she plans on donating hers. So I'd love to like hear what her experience is. Her husband's like totally on board with it, whereas mine is like, I don't know about this, but
yeah, it's a big deal.
Decision for sure. Yeah.
But it gets more and more expensive just to have the embryos frozen every year.
You're just paying to store them. I know.
They're just going to make it so expensive. Like you are forced to make a decision. I could see myself holding on to them for a very long time if it weren't so expensive.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing your story. Is there anything else that you want to share with listeners? I mean, I think this is really like, for me, if I was listening, I love the fact that like, I never thought.
I just want to show like a hopeful journey. I think it's not always the worst news in the world when you're both tested and find out that there's something, you know, and you don't know until you try. And like, it's really odds sometimes. It's crazy.
Yeah. No, I think this is so hopeful for listeners if they just were faced with like a diagnosis that they think now they may not be able to have kids. And so knowing this is an option for them, I think is just really, really encouraging. So we appreciate
you don't have to know your status for stuff. And I think there's also like multiple genetics companies to work with as well. Like our fertility clinic worked with Cooper Genomics, but like there was always other options to look into as well. So it just worked out. They were able to make our probe. I think we spent like between the 3 rounds around $25,000 in testing.
Wow.
Which is a lot. I mean,
in just the genetic
$600 to $800 an embryo. And I'm like, this is a lot.
Yeah. And that was the cost for like just the genetic portion
just testing and like the shipping costs and the biopsies and like that kind of stuff. And I don't think that includes what we paid to the fertility clinic to do the biopsies. I think that was additional on top of that. So that can be very, very pricey. And that's another reason, like, not that the embryos aren't worth anything, but like you've also spent a lot of money having those tested and you know, like which ones are good ones. So I'd love for somebody else to have the opportunity, like, those are great embryos and they worked for me. So it would be really nice.
So you have 5 left, is that right?
I do. Yeah. 5 little boys someplace.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you. I'm glad this worked out. I was like,